This is Wilson Morales from Black Film and TV talking to writer, director, producer Chyna Robinson on her film No Ordinary Love, which will be coming to streaming platforms on June 15th. Hello, Chyna. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Hello, hello. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so, every independent film has its journey, and this film has had its journey since last year when I first heard of it. It's made the festival run, and now it's going to come out for a bigger, wider audiences. Now that some people, even though the pandemic is starting to come down a bit, and people are starting to go to theaters again, but people are still watching things on streaming channels. That's how they prefer it for the last year. Uh, Talk to me about. Let's go back to see where did the story come from.
Well, the story came from a friend of mine approaching me and saying, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a film if I found private funding?" And as a filmmaker, unless it's something that's just, not your story to tell, you say yes, absolutely. So I said, yes, absolutely. And she said, all right, well, write the story however you want to write it, create what you want to create, and we'll make this thing happen. And so that's how the movie came to be. The
Why?
story, oh,
Yeah, why this particular story?
so the executive producer, the friend that approached me, she was serving as the chair on the board for a local women's shelter and service center. And so intimate partner violence was a big part of her life, and she had her own experience in the past. And so it was important for her to get, this awareness out. Well, when she approached me, I was saying, oh, maybe we'll do a short film or, we can do something. But as I hopped into research, about 2.5 months worth of research, I came back and I said, so the funding that you found for the short, can we stretch it? Because it needs to be a feature and like not a documentary, but an actual, like, my thought was to do a romantic thriller because we have to make it watchable for everybody, not just those that are involved with advocacy for domestic abuse awareness.
And obviously, you had insight because of the shelter as far as the story is concerned. Did you talk to more women as you started fleshing out the characters?
Well, before I even started the writing process, while I was figuring out what I wanted my story to be, I needed to answer the questions that I had about intimate partner violence. So for me, I didn't even know really what it was. I thought abuse was someone is hitting someone and why doesn't she leave or he leave? I didn't understand that there was such complexity in it and that it wasn't just about hitting, that it's about power and control, and hitting is not always present. And so I did speak with over 20 women, um, survivors of abuse. I went to the shelter. I spoke with the counselors, the intake, the hotline operators. I went and sat in with our assistant DA on a DV homicide trial. I sat in on court dated sessions with offenders and read every statistic I could get my hands on. So I did a deep dive into the research for this subject, and then I decided, okay, now I need to make these real people, make believable characters, and tell this story, but in a way where it's not preachy and it's not gory and all the things, and it's believable. So we've seen films in the past that they're Hollywoodized, like Sleeping with the Enemy, which I love Julia Roberts, so I own the movie as a matter of fact. Um, but I wanted to dive a little deeper into what it really, really looks like.
You say "Sipping with the Enemies," others would say Tyler Perry-ish. You know, um, but the men in the movie, did you want to balance it out? Obviously, you're taking the side of the woman, and not saying you're taking a side, is you're showing their perspective. You know, and there's no spoiler, but you wonder, like, with the men in the film, the way they're painted, you know is that coming from that side of the stories that you heard of? Or because I'm trying to, as I watched this, I was trying to say, okay, is there anybody good, is there any guy, is there any male that's coming out in a good light here?
Yeah, and as we saw, there are. Like, I wanted to counter every character. So we have the women that are good, but they're not perfect. One has the attitude and the other is, whatever. But we also have the judge, who's not a great woman. And then for the men, we have the two husbands, but we also have, the pastor that we see, or the minister that we see in the hospital scene. Without giving too much away, we see the good cop versus the bad cop. So it's, I wanted to make sure that I was not bashing men, because I'm not for it. I love men, I love women, I love all people. But it was very important to me not to make this a male bashing film. I wanted it to not be about the women necessarily that are right or wrong. I just wanted it to be like about intimate partner violence and what it really looks like. And usually, what it looks like when it gets dangerous is men are the offenders and women are the ones taking it, statistically.
And obviously you directed it, you wrote it, you produced it. That's a lot of hats to wear on a project. So what were the challenging aspects of putting this together?
Um, all of the things. Making an independent film, as I'm sure you know, is just hard in itself. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. There's never enough, anything. But we wanted to operate in excellence. So we made sure that we had sufficient crew and that we had, everything done. But I was wearing more than those three hats. As like I said, in the indie world, you wear all the hats. And then my executive producer also wore lots of hats. So we were really working together and making sure this thing took off. So we just split it up. Like the research, that was me, but she opened the door, for me to talk to the correct people. Um, the casting, I did the casting for it as well. And then on set, it's kind of like you're both putting out all the fires. Whatever comes up, you fix it and you keep moving. And so we were able to do that and
Mhm.
make the movie.
I think at the end of the day, when you talk about independent films, as many hats as you wear, the MVP at the end of the day is the editor. Because once you've shot as many scenes that you have, and it's a wrap. Now it's a matter of like, and I guess from my understanding, not all films are done in order, or at least not shot in order. You
Mhm.
take scene here, now you're putting it together, and then you have to work out to see like what is needed in. Does it add to the story? Does it take away from the story? And then when you have it done and it's completed, now you have to shop it around and say, okay, who can I sell it to? Because last year, it was hard to get films being seen.
Yeah.
You have the theaters, but then again, it was also a great year for independent films, and I say that because um, you didn't have to worry about the box office. Whereas if you have a Wonder Woman and playing in 4,000 theaters, and you have a small film playing in like 5 theaters, you didn't have to worry about that if you were able to get your film seen in any sort of platform, was it's drive-in theaters, streaming platform. It's the same. Everybody can catch it at the same time.
Yeah.
So films coming out now for a wider audience, and there are those who saw it last at the festival. What's your takeaway as a filmmaker after you completed this and you shown this last year? I'm sure you got some responses, but what was your takeaway after you completed this as far as what you need to do for your next project? Do you want to take on less roles? Obviously, if you get funding, you can hire people, but what did you learn from making this movie?
Um, you know, from making this movie, I think, I mean, you pick up something with everything that you do, with the short film, with the, with the feature. So you continuously, if you're good, or if you want to be good or better, you'll pick up something every time. So moving forward, um, it's a matter of maybe being even more resourceful, getting more money, being more creative, and finding ways to get more funding and more funding. And, eventually, because we're going to these festivals, and very true that last year was much better for indie films, but also with any festival, any year, you're sometimes competing as an indie film that's spending, $100,000, $200,000 or less, some $20,000, you're competing with $5 million films,
Mhm.
with names and with recognizable people and things like that. So what I've learned is, for one, you kind of need a name in your film, and um, to get that type of recognition and funding. And And that's not to say like the actors in my movie, I think they did a phenomenal job, but you know, we know what sells. And so you have to, you know, play the game, and the game is you have to put some names in there, and you know, so that's probably my takeaway moving forward.
But that could be the case, and at the same time, it's also the story. You know, there was over 20 years ago, I saw a film had no big names. It was an independent film I saw at a festival, and it was a shoddy production. You know, the lights were dimmed and all that, but the story sold. And I remember I told the director, I met him afterwards and said, listen, you got a solid story here, keep it going. And then he got the funding for his next movie, you know, probably because of the story. You know, sometimes it's like, okay, you know, people will give you leeway on the money issue, like, oh, okay, look what she had to work with, look what he had to work with. You
Mhm,
know, was
mhm.
it's the talent they don't have or so, but there's a story there. So like, let's see what they can do next, you know. And because you also a writer, and nowadays, you know, that's what we need more. We need more writers out there that's going to put the story out there. And you know, you're also producers, so you also know what sells, what people are, you know, what's the hot thing that people are going to say yes to. You know, you can. There's always the stories that you want to tell and the stories that will sell. You know, that will get somebody says, okay, I can put something behind this, because you know, putting money behind the projects, yeah, now you get to put money behind the marketing of that.
Mhm,
um, you
mhm.
know, in terms of, you know, this story in particular, you know, is there, every film has its audience. Where is the audience for this as far as what people want to see now? You know, sometimes people get to the point where like, I don't want to see something depressing or something like, but sometimes these stories need to be shown because people need a visualization of what's really happening outside of what they read in paper or see on the news.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing. There are some hard topics that are out there. We saw Ava's When They See Us, and that was a really hard watch, and she did it, you know, that way for a reason. With this one, it will be a hard watch for some, but I've never heard that it was depressing, even though when people hear domestic violence or intimate partner violence, I don't want to deal with that. We've been through enough, you know, with the pandemic and with everything else that's going on, um, with the policing and like just everything that's been going on, you know. So they might think, you know, this movie is just not for me, but that's why I wrote it as a romantic thriller, because it appeals to people who care about the issue, but it also appeals to people who just like this type of movie. Like there are moments in the film where you're literally like holding your breath and gripping your chair, you know, whatever. And there are moments where you're laughing or enjoying them singing in the kitchen, or, you know, you're yelling at the screen at some of the characters and what they've decided to do. So we've had all types of reactions. The film's won a lot of audience choice awards and other awards, best film and script and all of that stuff. So I think it's relevant to the times. We've seen, you know, in culture, we've seen so many women starting to step forward and say, hey, this was my situation. We've
Mhm.
seen, you know, the situation with Meg Thee Stallion. We've seen Neil's wife on the Women Behind the Men. Crystal Smith came forward with her story. Tammy Franklin, Kirk Franklin's wife, witnessed, you know, this situation in her home. So we're finally able to talk about this thing that has been so quiet. It's been a secret for so long. And this is across the board, not the Black culture, not white people, Hispanics, like not, you know, $1 million neighborhoods versus whatever. Yeah, it's for everybody. So this is, I wrote it this way. It's a universal film. It's for everybody. It's about everybody.
Mhm.
So, you know, hopefully it'll find its way to those who, you know, would be surprised to see how they feel when the movie's over.
All right. So, what platforms is this going to be streaming on?
It's going to be on several, but the big ones that most people have are Amazon Prime, iTunes, Apple TV, Dish, or Direct TV.
Mhm. Now,
So
what's next for you? The film has been shot. It's ready to come out. What are you working on now?
I'm actually working on a love story I'll be shooting this summer, and those will have that one will have some faces that everybody knows. And then I'm about to hop into pre-production for a sci-fi fantasy film.
Okay.
So that one, both I'm super excited about. Just two totally different things. For the sci-fi fantasy part will be shot here in the United States, and the majority will be shot in Africa.
Nice. That's bad indeed. Well, I definitely want to thank you for talking about No Ordinary Love, which is obviously, as you mentioned, going to be streaming on June 15th. We look down the road. We'll look down the road for your upcoming projects, and we'll talk later.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.